I stared at my phone, the banking app's balance frozen at $847.23. Not the usual comfortable buffer that had cushioned our joint account for years, but a number that felt deliberately calculated. Specific enough to avoid triggering fraud alerts, small enough to send a message. The timestamp mocked me, 2:14 a.m., while I had been sleeping peacefully beside him in our king-sized bed with the imported Italian sheets he'd insisted we needed. My husband Derek had siphoned $12,000 from our checking account with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a snake. "Everything okay, darling?" His voice oozed artificial concern as he entered our kitchen, his navy tie perfectly knotted against his crisp white shirt. The same hands that had held mine during our wedding vows 8 years ago had just digitally gutted our shared finances while I dreamed. Before I could respond, he was already reaching for his titanium coffee maker, the one that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I forced a smile. Muscle memory from years of playing the supportive wife. "Just checking our accounts. Seems there might be some irregularity." "Banking glitch, probably," Derek replied, not meeting my eyes as he poured his imported Ethiopian blend into the mug I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. The one engraved with "World's Best Husband" that now felt like a cruel joke. "I'll call them from the office." He wouldn't, of course. We both knew that. Just as we both knew what the subtle shifting of boxes in his home office meant last Tuesday when I'd brought him lunch. Just as we both recognized the scent of unfamiliar perfume that occasionally clung to his custom suits from his Palo Alto tailor. Just as we both pretended not to notice the late-night texts that made him smile in ways I hadn't caused in years. But siphoning our accounts, that was the declaration of war I hadn't expected so soon. "Don't forget dinner with the Harpers tonight," he reminded me, kissing my cheek perfunctorily before heading toward the door of our Pacific Heights Victorian, the house I'd found, the renovations I'd managed while he focused on building the future. "Michelle's been asking about you." Michelle Harper, his business partner's wife and my supposed friend. The woman who looked at me with barely concealed pity during our last dinner when Derek's hand lingered too long on our sommeliers wrist while ordering wine. "I remember," I replied softly, my fingers already typing a different message on my phone. Not to our bank, that would be pointless, but to Aisha Marquez, the most thorough divorce attorney in San Francisco, whose number I'd saved 3 months ago when I found the first hotel receipt tucked in Derek's laptop bag. As the door closed behind him with its familiar solid thunk, I allowed myself a momentary smile. Derek clearly thought he was several moves ahead in a game where I hadn't even seen the board. Poor Derek. Always underestimating the quiet wife who gave up her rising career in UX research to support his startup dreams, who organized his investor dinners and remembered his partner's children's birthdays, who nodded appreciatively when he mansplained technology concepts to dinner guests, concepts I had helped develop before I became Mrs. Derek Grant. He had no idea what was coming. My phone buzzed with a response from Aisha. 9:00 my office. Bring documentation. I walked to our home office, Derek's office, technically, though I was the one who organized his files and managed his calendar. Behind his pretentious collection of first edition tech biographies was a small fireproof safe. The combination was our wedding date, a sentimental choice for a man who had clearly abandoned sentiment somewhere between Series A and Series B funding rounds. Inside wasn't much. Our marriage certificate, property deeds, insurance policies. I took everything, sliding them into my leather portfolio, the one Derek had bought me when I briefly returned to consulting 2 years ago, before he decided my working made him look unsuccessful. Then I moved to the abstract painting on the adjacent wall, a hideous piece Derek had insisted was an important investment despite my protests. Behind it was my safe. My combination wasn't our anniversary or my birthday or anything Derek might guess. It was March 18th, the day 3 years ago when I stopped believing his lies, when a late-night call to his office was answered by the sound of a woman's laughter and the unmistakable clink of hotel glasses. My safe contained the documentation of a different life, a parallel financial existence Derek knew nothing about. Bank statements for accounts in my maiden name Winters. Investment portfolios that had quietly grown while Derek thought I was just managing our household budget. Records of the consulting work I'd been doing discreetly for the past 18 months, filtered through an LLC registered under Noel Winters Consulting, while Derek saw me as a decorative accessory to his successful life. The Stanford MBA who'd given up everything to make his coffee and coordinate his dry cleaning. I'd been methodically preparing for the moment when the mask would finally slip. I just hadn't expected him to accelerate the timeline by bleeding our shared accounts. The irony was almost perfect. Derek had built his entire company, Nexus Analytics, around predicting user behavior through data patterns. He'd spent years analyzing how people made decisions, what motivated them, how to anticipate their next moves. Yet somehow, he'd failed to notice that his own wife had been quietly collecting data on him for 3 years. I dressed carefully, choosing a charcoal wool dress that commanded respect without demanding attention, the opposite of the attention-grabbing outfits Derek preferred me to wear at his company events. Today I needed to be invisible rather than ornamental. The morning fog was just lifting as I drove through the city, past the startup offices in Soma where Derek and I had once dreamed together, past the coffee shops where we'd planned our future over Ethiopian pour-overs and shared pastries. San Francisco looked different now, not the city of our early romance, but the backdrop for what I was finally ready to acknowledge had become a hollow performance. My phone rang as I navigated the steep streets toward downtown. Derek's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message while stopped at a red light. Hey babe, I know you're probably worried about the account thing. Look, I had to move some money around for a business opportunity, should have mentioned it. We can talk tonight, okay? Love you. The casual dismissal in his voice, the assumption that a simple explanation would smooth over what amounted to financial violation, crystallized something inside me. This wasn't about the money. This was about the years of small erosions, the gradual diminishment of my voice, my opinions, my presence in my own life. I deleted the message and continued driving. Aisha Marquez's office occupied the 32nd floor of a sleek downtown tower, her floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the bay that reminded everyone who entered of exactly how successful she was. She didn't rise when I arrived, merely gestured to the chair across from her glass desk while finishing a phone call that seemed deliberately timed to establish her importance. So, she said finally, setting down her phone and examining me with cool appraisal, another tech executive who thinks the rules of basic human decency don't apply to him. He siphoned $12,000 from our joint account at 2:14 this morning, I replied. Transferred it to an account I've never seen before. Aisha's perfectly sculpted eyebrow rose slightly. And you were expecting this? Not today, but eventually. I opened my portfolio and slid the first set of documents across her desk. These are our joint financial records for the past 5 years. Properties, investments, tax returns. She glanced at them, unimpressed. Standard. Your husband made what, 800,000 last year as CEO? 1 million plus equity compensation. I handed her another folder. And these are my personal financial records. The accounts he doesn't know about. This earned me her full attention. She opened the folder, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. As she scanned the contents, you've been busy, Mrs. Grant. Noel, I corrected her. And yes, I have. Most of my clients come in shocked and unprepared when their husbands pull this kind of financial manipulation. I'm not most of your clients, I said quietly. I was a senior UX researcher at Palantir before I married Derek. He used to joke that I gave up millions to make his coffee and organize his social calendar. Aisha's lip curled slightly. Charming. He stopped finding my intelligence charming around year 2 of our marriage. By year 5, he was introducing me at company parties as my beautiful wife rather than mentioning I have an MBA from Berkeley, yet you've managed to accumulate. She flipped through the statements. Almost $400,000 in assets he knows nothing about. I never stopped working. I just stopped working visibly. I leaned forward slightly. Remote consulting, algorithm optimization for private clients, investment management all through my LLC, which he never bothered to investigate because he assumed I was too busy playing housewife to have a real business. For the first time since I'd entered her office, Aisha smiled, not the practiced professional smile, but something genuine and slightly predatory. Mrs. Grant, Noel, I think we're going to get along very well. The first thing you need to understand, Aisha said, sliding a legal pad across her desk, is that men like your husband don't go quietly. They especially don't go quietly when they realize their decorative wife has been 3 steps ahead of them for years. I picked up the gold pen she'd placed beside the pad, Mont Blanc, expensive, the kind of detail that reminded clients they were paying for excellence. What exactly are you expecting him to do? Everything. Aisha leaned back in her leather chair, fingers steepled. Delay tactics, character assassination, financial hide and seek, emotional manipulation disguised as reconciliation attempts. Derek will throw every trick in the narcissist's playbook at you before he accepts that this marriage is over. The morning sun had burned through the fog, now streaming through her office windows and casting sharp shadows across the legal documents spread between us. From 30 floors up, San Francisco looked manageable, contained. The city where Derek and I had built our life together seemed small enough to fit in my palm. I need you to document everything, Aisha continued, pulling out a leather portfolio, thick with forms, every conversation, every text message, every financial irregularity. When he tries to gaslight you and I want evidence that could hold up in federal court. I've been documenting for 3 years. I opened my phone and showed her a folder labeled Household Admin. Inside were hundreds of screenshots, recorded calls, saved emails. Derek thinks I'm just obsessively organized. He has no idea I've been building a case study of his behavior patterns. Aisha's smile was sharp as a blade. You really aren't most of my clients. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out legal strategy. Aisha explained the labyrinthine process of California divorce law, the mandatory waiting periods, the financial disclosure requirements that would force Derek to reveal assets he'd assumed would remain hidden. She walked me through restraining orders, contempt citations, the nuclear option of criminal charges if his financial misconduct crossed certain lines. I'm going to assign you a paralegal, she said, gathering the documents we'd reviewed. Maya Patel. She's young but brilliant, and she has a particular talent for uncovering hidden assets. Plus, she's discreet. Why does discretion matter? Because your husband is going to hire private investigators to dig into your life the moment he's served with papers. The less they can find about our strategy, the better. Aisha stood, extending her hand. One more thing, Noel. From this moment forward, assume every conversation with Derek is being recorded. Don't say anything you wouldn't want played in open court. I left her office with a thick folder of intake forms and a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. The elevator descended smoothly, carrying me back to street level, where real life waited, the life I was finally ready to reclaim. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking garage. A text from Derek. Running late tonight. Start dinner without me. Kiss. The casual dismissal felt different now, filtered through the lens of legal strategy rather than marital disappointment. I screenshot the message and filed it in my evidence folder. Everything was evidence now. I drove across the city to Isaac Lee's office in Mission Bay, navigating the construction-clogged streets that Derek always complained about, but I found oddly comforting, a city perpetually rebuilding itself, never quite finished, always becoming something new. Isaac had been my closest friend since our days at Palantir, one of the few people who'd known me before I became Derek Grant's wife. His company, Fortress Digital, specialized in cybersecurity. For startups, the kind of quiet, essential work that kept Silicon Valley's house of cards from collapsing. You look different, he said when I walked into his office. Lighter somehow. I'm leaving Derek. Isaac's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, then something that looked suspiciously like relief. Jesus, Noel. Finally. What happened? I told him about the morning's discoveries, the money transfers, the meeting with Aisha. Isaac listened without interruption, his dark eyes growing increasingly serious as I outlined the legal battle ahead. You know he's going to try to destroy your business, Isaac said when I finished. Derek's not going to accept that his decorative wife has been out tyranning him for months. That's why I'm here. I need your help securing everything: client files, financial records, communications. If Derek tries to sabotage Winners Consulting, I want to be ready. Isaac was already pulling up screens on his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. We'll set up redundant cloud storage, encrypted backups, secure communication channels. By the time I'm done, your business will be more protected than most Fortune 500 companies. We spent the afternoon building digital fortresses around my consulting work. Isaac created hidden backup systems, encrypted client databases, secure email protocols that would make it impossible for Derek or anyone he hired to access my business operations. Watching him work was like watching a master craftsman, each security measure carefully layered to create an impenetrable defense. There's something else, Isaac said as we tested the final firewall configurations. I've been hearing rumors about Nexus Analytics. Word is they're hemorrhaging clients, missed their last 3 quarterly projections. Derek might be more desperate than you realize. This was new information, something that explained the increased financial pressure, the late night stress calls I'd heard him taking in his office. How desperate? Potentially facing acquisition or shutdown within 6 months, which means he needs my silence more than I thought. I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Derek had been playing chess while I learned the rules, but now I understood the board better than he did. My phone rang as Isaac and I finished setting up the security protocols. Derek's name flashed on the screen again. Answer it, Isaac advised. Let him dig his own grave. I accepted the call, putting it on speaker so Isaac could witness whatever manipulation Derek was about to attempt. Noel, thank God. Where are you? Running errands. Why? I need to talk to you about this morning. About the money. Derek's voice carried that particular tone he used when trying to manage my emotions, patronizing concern wrapped in false intimacy. I should have told you about the transfer. It's just business stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. $12,000 is nothing for me to worry about? Babe, you know I handle all the big financial decisions. This is just temporary, moving money around for a partnership opportunity. You trust me, right? Isaac was recording the call on his phone, making notes on a legal pad. The casual financial dismissal, the assumption that I should accept his unilateral decisions about our shared resources, all of it would sound even worse played back in a courtroom. Of course I trust you, Derek. The lie came easily now practiced. I was just surprised to see the balance so low. I'll transfer money back tomorrow. Hey, listen. I might be home late tonight. This deal is heating up and I need to be available for calls. Another lie, probably. But also more evidence of the double life he'd been living while expecting me to remain decoratively stationary in hours. I understand. I'll probably be in bed when you get home. Love you, babe. The endearment felt like acid in my ears. Love you too. I hung up and immediately saved the recording to my evidence folder. Isaac was already creating an encrypted backup. He has no idea you're documenting this, Isaac observed. Derek's always assumed I'm too trusting to be strategic. Too pure. To be calculating. I air quoted the word he'd used to describe me at countless dinner parties, his pure wife, untainted by the moral compromises of business. He's about to learn otherwise. Maya Patel arrived at Aisha's office just as the afternoon fog began rolling in from the Pacific, turning the city's edges soft and mysterious. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 27, with dark hair pulled back in a precise bun and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Grant, she said, extending a firm handshake. I've reviewed your initial documentation. I have to say, I'm impressed by your thoroughness. Thank you. I also ran preliminary searches on your husband's business filings. Maya opened her laptop, pulling up screens full of corporate documents. There are some interesting discrepancies in Nexus Analytics reported revenues versus their operational spending, plus several recently formed LLCs that list Derek as the sole member. I shall lean forward. Shell companies? Possibly. Or preparation for asset hiding. Maya turned the screen so we could see the maze of corporate entities Derek had created. The timing is suspicious, all formed within the past for months, right around when your marital problems escalated. I studied the documents, recognizing the meticulous planning behind Derek's corporate structure. He'd been preparing for this divorce longer than I'd realized, setting up financial hiding places while still playing the loving husband at home. Can we trace where the money's going? I asked. With court orders, yes, but we'll need to move fast. Men like your husband are very good at making assets disappear once they realize they're being investigated. We spent the next hour mapping Derek's financial maze, identifying accounts and entities that would need to be frozen, assets that would need to be protected. Maya worked with the precision of a forensic accountant, building the foundation for a case that would be impossible for Derek to dismiss or delay. One more thing, Maya said as we prepared to leave. I did some research on your husband's attorney. He doesn't have one yet. He doesn't even know I'm filing. Maya's smile was sharp. Actually, he retained Caleb Sorensen 3 days ago. Corporate lawyer who specializes in high-asset divorce defense. He's good at making wealthy men's problems disappear. The revelation hit like cold water. Derek had been preparing for this divorce while still playing the role of surprised husband. The financial transfers, the shell companies, the legal representation, all of it had been calculated while he kissed me goodbye each morning. How did you find this out? Court filings are public record once they're submitted. Sorensen filed a preemptive motion on Derek's behalf yesterday, requesting mediation and a cooling-off period. He's trying to control the narrative before you. Even file your petition. Aisha's expression had turned predatory. Then we file tomorrow. No more waiting. No more preparation time for Derek's legal team. Maya, I want that contempt motion template ready. If Derek wants to play games with court orders, we'll make sure there are consequences. As I left the office building, the evening fog was thick enough to blur the city's edges, turning San Francisco into something dreamlike and uncertain. But for the first time in years, I felt anchored in my own life, grounded in my own choices. Derek's car wasn't in our driveway when I got home. Another late night at the office, another evening of mysterious business calls. The house felt different now, not like the home we'd built together, but like a stage set. I was finally ready to leave. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at our kitchen island, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle through the fog. Tomorrow, the papers would be filed. Tomorrow, Derek would learn that his decorative wife had been building her own empire while he wasn't paying attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Isaac. Digital fortress complete. Your business is bulletproof. Then another from Maya. Divorce. Petition ready for filing. Tomorrow. And finally, one from Derek. Deal fell through. Coming home now. Miss you. I screenshot all 3 messages and filed them appropriately. Evidence of preparation, evidence of legal strategy, and evidence of Derek's continued deception. The game was about to begin. But this time, I knew the rules. The divorce papers were served at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday while Derek was in his weekly board meeting at Nexus Analytics. I know the exact time because Maya had coordinated with the process server to ensure maximum impact. Derek's professional facade cracking in front of his investors and senior staff. I was in my home office, officially working on a user experience audit for a biotech startup, when my phone rang. Derek's name flashed on the screen like an emergency alert. What the fuck, Noel? No greeting. No pretense of civility. The mask had dropped completely, revealing the man I'd glimpsed in fragments over the past 3 years but never seen in full daylight. I assume you received the papers, I replied, keeping my voice level while hitting record on the app Isaac had installed for me. You think you're clever? Filing behind my back like some kind of, he caught himself before saying something that would sound even worse in court recordings. We need to talk. This is insane. Actually, Derek, we really don't. Everything I have to say is in the petition. You can respond through your attorney. My attorney? The surprise in his voice was perfect theatrical confusion. Noel, I don't have an attorney. I don't need an attorney because my wife isn't supposed to be ambushing me with divorce papers. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted what Maya had discovered. Almost. But Caleb Sorensen's preemptive filing was documented, time-stamped, impossible to deny. Caleb Sorensen, I said simply. You retained him last Thursday. Silence stretched across the line like a held breath. Derek was recalculating, adjusting his strategy in real time. That was just precautionary, a consultation. Jesus, Noel, you're acting like I'm the enemy here. You emptied our joint account, Derek. You created shell companies. You hired a divorce attorney while still playing the loving husband. Each accusation landed with quiet precision. What exactly would you call that behavior? Smart business planning, he shot back, anger creeping through his controlled facade. Something you wouldn't understand because you've never actually built anything real. There it was, the fundamental disrespect that had eroded our marriage, one dismissive comment at a time. Derek truly believed my consulting business was playing pretend, that my MBA was decorative, that my intelligence was a pleasant accessory to his real success. I'll be sure to mention that perspective to my clients, I replied. The ones who pay me 6 figures to solve problems you couldn't even identify. I ended the call before he could respond, immediately saving the recording to my evidence folder. 23 minutes of Derek revealing exactly who he was when he thought no one was keeping score. The next call came an hour later. This time, it was Caleb Sorensen himself, all smooth charm and strategic concern. Mrs. Grant? Caleb Sorensen. I represent your husband in this unfortunate situation, Mr. Sorensen. I put him on speaker so I could continue working while he attempted whatever manipulation Derek had sent him to perform. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss resolution options. I think we can find a path forward that avoids the trauma and expense of litigation. Translation: Derek wants to control the narrative and minimize his financial exposure. I'm afraid that's not possible. Any communication should go through my attorney, Aisha Marquez. Of course. Professional courtesy. But perhaps we could arrange an informal conversation? Your husband is quite concerned about your emotional state. He wants to make sure you're thinking clearly about this decision. The audacity was breathtaking. Derek had sent his lawyer to suggest I was having an emotional breakdown, that my carefully documented legal strategy was actually mental instability. Mr. Sorensen, I've been thinking clearly for 3 years. The only thing that's changed is that I'm finally acting on that clarity. Mrs. Grant, I hope you understand that contested divorces can be very ugly, very public. Your husband has significant resources and a reputation to protect. It might be better for everyone if we could reach an amicable settlement. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was the threat, wrapped in legal courtesy. Derek would make this battle as destructive as possible unless I agreed to quietly disappear with whatever scraps he felt like offering. Mr. Sorensen, I hope you understand that I have significant documentation of your client's financial misconduct and emotional abuse. It might be better for his reputation if he cooperated with discovery rather than forcing me to present that evidence in open court. The line went quiet for several seconds. Caleb was reassessing, realizing that Derek's decorative wife had fangs. Well, he said finally, his tone noticeably cooler. I look forward to working with Miss Marquez on this matter. The mediation scheduling began immediately. Caleb filed motion after motion requests for delays, demands for financial disclosure that he claimed were overly broad, challenges to the jurisdiction of certain accounts. Each filing was designed to slow the process, to exhaust my resources and resolve, but Derek had made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed I would react emotionally to his legal maneuvering, that I would grow frustrated and settle for less than I deserved. He'd spent years conditioning me to avoid conflict, to prioritize peace over principle. What he hadn't considered was that I'd been analyzing user behavior professionally for over a decade. I understood psychological manipulation because I'd been paid to engineer it. Every delay tactic, every emotional provocation, every attempt to make me doubt my own perceptions, I recognized them all as variations on interfaces designed to guide users toward predetermined outcomes. Derek was treating our divorce like a product launch, trying to optimize my behavior toward his desired result. The problem was that I'd helped design the playbook he was using. The first mediation session was scheduled for the following Thursday. Derek arrived 20 minutes late, flooding the conference room with apologies about traffic and urgent client calls. Classic power move, making everyone wait to establish his importance. He was performing the role of concerned husband beautifully. Slightly rumpled shirt, tired eyes, the whole package designed to suggest a man pushed to his limits by his wife's unreasonable demands. Noelle, he said, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. I'm so glad we can finally talk about this. I kept my hands folded in my lap, maintaining polite distance. Hello, Derek. The mediator, a silver-haired woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, reviewed the basic parameters while Derek performed active listening, nodding thoughtfully, taking notes, projecting the image of someone committed to fair resolution. Mr. Grant, Dr. Webb began, your wife has requested full financial disclosure, including business accounts and recently formed corporate entities. Are you prepared to provide that documentation? Absolutely, Derek replied without hesitation. I want complete transparency. I think there might be some misunderstandings about my business arrangements, but I'm happy to clarify everything. Caleb slid a folder across the table. We've prepared preliminary financial statements covering the relevant accounts. Maya had coached me on this moment. The preliminary disclosure would be incomplete, designed to look cooperative while hiding the most important assets. The real test would be whether Derek provided the documentation he was legally required to submit. Aisha reviewed the papers quickly, her expression revealing nothing. These statements only cover the primary business account and to personal savings accounts. Mrs. Grant has documentation suggesting at least 7 additional corporate entities. I think there might be some confusion, Caleb interjected smoothly. Mr. Grant's business dealings are complex, But all marital assets are fully disclosed here. The gaslighting was happening in real time, professional and polite. Derek's lawyer was suggesting that my documented evidence was somehow mistaken, that the corporate entities Maya had discovered didn't exist or weren't relevant. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up session once Mr. Grant has had time to review his records more thoroughly, Dr. Webb suggested. Derek nodded earnestly. Of course. I want to make sure Noelle has all the information she needs. I just need a few days to compile everything properly. Another delay, another opportunity for assets to disappear or be restructured. But I had expected this. That's fine, I said quietly. Take all the time you need. Derek looked surprised by my easy acceptance. He'd been expecting me to push back, to demand immediate compliance. My calm agreement clearly wasn't part of his script. The session ended with handshakes and professional courtesy. Derek lingered as the others gathered their papers, clearly hoping for a private moment. Noelle, can we grab coffee? Just for a few minutes? I don't think that's appropriate, Derek. Please. I just want to understand why you're doing this. We can work through whatever's wrong. There was genuine confusion in his voice, as if my decision to divorce him was an inexplicable betrayal rather than the inevitable consequence of his behavior. He truly couldn't comprehend that I'd been paying attention all along. Derek, there's nothing to work through. This marriage is over. Because of some money transfers? Because I've been stressed about work? Noelle, every marriage has problems. You don't just give up. The rewriting of history was swift and complete. Years of emotional manipulation had become stress about work. Financial misconduct had become some money transfers. My carefully documented evidence had become me giving up on our marriage. I'm not giving up, I replied. I'm choosing myself. That evening, Derek began his campaign to reclaim the narrative. Text messages arrived every few hours, apologies, explanations, promises to change. Each message was screenshot and filed, evidence of a man trying to manipulate his way out of consequences. But the real campaign was happening elsewhere. I discovered it 3 days later when Isaac called with unusual urgency in his voice. Noelle, we need to talk. In person. He met me at a coffee shop in the Mission, far from our usual haunts in the tech corridor. His face was grim as he slid into the booth across from me. Derek hired a private investigator, he said without preamble. They approached 2 of your former Palantir colleagues, asking about your mental health, your work performance, whether you'd ever seemed unstable. The violation felt like ice water in my veins. Derek was trying to build a case that I was mentally unfit, that my divorce filing was the product of instability rather than careful decision-making. They also tried to access your business email server. My security protocols stopped them, but they're definitely looking for something to use against you. What kind of something? Client communications that could be taken out of context. Financial irregularities they could spin as fraud. Anything that would support a narrative of you as an unreliable narrator. I sat back in the booth, processing the escalation. Derek wasn't just fighting the divorce, he was trying to destroy my credibility entirely. There's more, Isaac continued. I ran background checks on Derek's legal team. Caleb Sorensen specializes in cases where wealthy men need to discredit their wives. He's very good at making successful women look unstable. But as Isaac outlined Derek's strategy, I felt something unexpected. Calm satisfaction. Derek was revealing the depths of his contempt for me, documenting his willingness to destroy my reputation to protect his assets. Every move he made was creating evidence of the very behavior patterns I'd been documenting for years. Let him, I said finally. Isaac looked surprised. Noelle, let him investigate me. Let him try to prove I'm unstable. The more effort he puts into discrediting me, the more obvious it becomes that he's the one acting irrationally. I pulled out my phone and showed Isaac the evidence folder I'd been building. I have 3 years of documentation, financial records, recorded calls, text messages, email chains. Derek trying to paint me as mentally unstable while I present organized, methodical evidence of his misconduct? That's not going to look good in court. Isaac studied my phone screen, scrolling through the meticulous organization I'd maintained. You've been planning this for a long time. I've been protecting myself for a long time. There's a difference. My phone buzzed with another text from Derek. Please call me. I love you and I want to fix this. I showed the message to Isaac, then filed it with the others. Evidence of a man who thought love was a negotiating tactic, who believed he could manipulate his way back into control. What's next? Isaac asked. We wait for him to miss the next deadline. Caleb will file for another extension, and Derek will fail to provide the required financial disclosure. I finished my coffee and gathered my things. And then we'll file our first contempt motion. You sound confident. Derek's following a predictable pattern. He thinks he's being strategic, but he's actually being compulsive. Men like him can't help themselves, they always overplay their hand. As I drove home through the evening traffic, I felt the strange peace that comes from finally understanding a complex system. Derek's behavior wasn't random or emotional, it was algorithmic, following the same logic patterns that govern user interfaces and customer acquisition funnels. He was optimizing for short-term control without considering long-term consequences. Classic engineering mindset applied to human relationships. The difference was that I'd learned to think in systems too. And I'd been building a better algorithm all along. The financial disclosure Derek finally submitted was a masterpiece of creative accounting. 47 pages of meticulously formatted statements that revealed absolutely nothing while appearing completely transparent. Assets had been restructured, income had been delayed, and expenses had been inflated to paint a picture of a struggling entrepreneur barely keeping his company afloat. He's good, Maya admitted as we reviewed the documents in Aisha's conference room. Everything here is technically accurate. It's just that he's moved the money around so much that the trail is deliberately obscured. But you can trace it? I asked. With subpoena power, yes. The problem is that each account leads to another entity, which leads to another jurisdiction. Derek's bought himself months of legal delays, maybe years if he keeps moving assets internationally. Aisha leaned back in her chair, studying the documents with professional appreciation. Classic high net worth divorce strategy. Make compliance so expensive and time consuming that the spouse gives up and settles for scraps. I felt that familiar calm settling over me, the same analytical clarity I experienced when debugging complex user interface problems. Derek was solving for the wrong variables, optimizing for delay when he should have been optimizing for credibility. He's made a mistake, I said, which is, he's assuming I'm operating on an emotional timeline, that I need quick resolution because I'm financially desperate or psychologically fragile. I pulled out my phone and opened my business banking app, but I'm not. Winters Consulting had its best quarter ever while Derek was busy hiding assets. I can afford to wait him out. Maya looked up from her laptop where she'd been cross-referencing Derek's corporate filings. There's something else. I found an encrypted email thread between Derek and someone at Cayman National Bank. Looks like he's been exploring offshore options for the past 6 months. Can you access the emails? Not legally. But the metadata is interesting. The correspondence started 3 weeks before Derek first contacted Caleb Sorensen. He's been planning this financial shell game since before you even filed. Aisha made a note on her legal pad. That's premeditation. If we can prove he was hiding assets before the divorce proceedings began, it becomes criminal fraud rather than just marital misconduct. My phone rang as we finished documenting Derek's financial maze. The caller ID showed Derek's office number, but the voice that answered was his assistant, Stephanie. Mrs. Grant? I'm so sorry to bother you, but Mr. Grant asked me to reach out. He's had to cancel your dinner plans tonight, urgent client situation. He said he'd call you later to reschedule. The lie was so casual, so practiced, that I almost felt sorry for Stephanie, who clearly believed she was delivering a legitimate message. Derek had been using her to manage his deceptions for months, making her an unwitting accomplice in his double life. Thank you, Stephanie. Please tell him. That's fine. But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. Tonight was supposed to be Derek's attempt at romantic reconciliation dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, wine and candlelight and carefully orchestrated nostalgia designed to make me question my decision to leave. Instead, Derek was somewhere else, doing something he couldn't explain to his wife or his assistant. More evidence for the growing file of his pattern of deception. I drove home through the early evening traffic, past the billboards advertising Derek's company that still featured his carefully curated professional headshot, the successful CEO with the perfect smile and the hidden bankruptcy. Nexus Analytics was hemorrhaging clients faster than Derek could find new investors, but his public image remained pristine. For now, my house felt different when I entered, not like the home Derek and I had built together, but like a museum of a life I was finally ready to leave behind. The furniture he'd chosen, the art he'd selected, the lifestyle he'd designed around his vision of success. None of it felt like mine anymore. I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into the kitchen, nook where I'd done most of my consulting work over the past year. The view of the bay was spectacular, worth the mortgage payments Derek complained about but still somehow managed to cover despite his claims of financial hardship. My laptop chimed with a video call request from Isaac. His face appeared on screen, looking uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk about Derek's digital activities," he said without preamble. "What kind of activities?" "The kind that suggests he's not just hiding assets, he's planning to disappear them entirely." Isaac shared his screen, showing me a complex network diagram that looked like a spider web of interconnected nodes. "I've been monitoring traffic to your business servers, and I noticed some unusual patterns. Someone's been probing your security, but not randomly. They're looking for specific client information, Derek, or someone he hired. The attacks are sophisticated but focused. They're not trying to damage your systems, they're trying to access client contracts and financial projections. Like they're building a case that your business is worth less than you claim." The implications hit me immediately. Derek wasn't just hiding his own assets, he was trying to devalue mine. If he could prove that Winners Consulting was unstable or unprofitable, he could argue that I didn't deserve an equal split of our marital property. "Can you trace where the attacks are coming from?" "I'm working on it." "But Noel, there's something else? I found evidence that Derek's been in contact with your former boss at Palantir." Dr. Richardson responded to what looks like a reference check request. Dr. Richardson had been my mentor during my time at Palantir, the woman who'd encouraged me to start my own consulting practice. She'd also been the person I'd confided in about Derek's increasing emotional distance during our marriage. What did she tell him? "I can't access the actual conversation, but the timing is suspicious. Derek contacted her the same day his private investigator approached your other former colleagues. He's building a comprehensive character assassination campaign." I felt a flash of anger, not at Derek's tactics, which I'd expected, but at the violation of relationships I'd trusted. Derek was poisoning my professional network, turning my own career history into ammunition against me. "There's more," Isaac continued. "I intercepted a communication between Derek and his lawyer about something called Project Reset. I couldn't get the full details, but it looks like they're planning some kind of major financial restructuring." "When?" "Soon. Maybe within the next week or two." The timeline was accelerating. Derek was no longer playing defensive games, he was preparing for something big. A final move that would either secure his financial position or destroy both of us in the attempt. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Judge Torres assigned to your case. Good news, she's known for being tough on financial misconduct." Judge Helena Torres had a reputation in San Francisco family court as someone who didn't tolerate games. Corporate lawyers feared her because she understood complex financial structures well enough to see through most deception attempts. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. "Mrs. Grant, this is Carol Lynn from TechCrunch. I'm working on a story about startup financial practices, and I'd like to speak with you about Nexus Analytics. Could we set up a brief call?" My blood turned cold. A tech journalist was investigating Derek's company, and somehow my name had come up in connection with their financial practices. Derek's carefully maintained public image was starting to crack. I screenshot both messages and sent them to Aisha with a note. "Things are escalating." Her response came immediately. "Don't talk to the journalist yet. Let's see what she knows first." But I was already Googling Carol Lynn, reading her recent articles about tech industry misconduct and financial fraud. She specialized in exposing the gap between startup PR and startup reality, exactly the kind of story that would destroy Derek's remaining credibility. The irony was perfect. Derek had spent years dismissing my understanding of the tech industry, treating me like an outsider who couldn't comprehend the complexities of his business world. Now, tech journalist was reaching out to me for insights about his company's practices. My laptop chimed with another video call. This time it was Aisha, calling from what looked like her car. "I just got a very interesting phone call," she said. "Caleb Sorensen wants to schedule an emergency mediation session. Says Derek is prepared to make a generous settlement offer to avoid further conflict." How generous? He didn't specify, but the urgency suggests Derek knows something we don't, or something he doesn't want us to find out. I thought about Project Reset, about the journalist's inquiry, about the timing of Derek's sudden willingness to negotiate. He's running out of time, I realized. Whatever he's been planning, it has a deadline, and that deadline is approaching faster than he expected. That's my assessment too. Which means we need to be very careful about his settlement offer. Desperate men make desperate proposals. After Aisha hung up, I sat in my kitchen watching the lights come on across the bay. San Francisco at night looked like a circuit board, all glowing connections and electrical pathways. The city where Derek and I had built our life together, where his company was slowly collapsing, where my new business was quietly thriving. My phone rang again. Derek's name on the caller ID. "Hey babe," he said when I answered, his voice carrying that familiar tone of false intimacy. "I'm sorry about dinner. This client situation is really complicated. I understand. Actually, I was thinking we should talk about everything. About us." He paused, probably for dramatic effect. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I haven't been the husband you deserve." The admission sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Part of the reconciliation script his lawyer had probably coached him to deliver. "Derek, just hear me out, okay? I know I've made mistakes. The money stuff, not communicating better, letting work stress affect our relationship. But I love you, Noel. I've always loved you. And I think we can fix this if we both really try." "It's too late for that, is it though? Really? I mean, we haven't even tried counseling. We haven't explored our options. You just filed papers and shut down all communication." There was the gaslighting again, subtle but persistent. Derek rewriting history to make my carefully considered decision seem impulsive and unreasonable. "I tried to communicate with you for 3 years, Derek. You weren't interested in listening. That's not fair. I've always listened to you." When did you listen when I told you I wanted to go back to work? When I said I felt isolated from my career? When I asked you to include me in financial decisions? Those are business decisions, Noel. I was protecting you from that stress. You were protecting yourself from my input. The silent stretch between us, filled with years of unspoken resentment and unacknowledged power imbalances. "Look," Derek said finally, "Caleb thinks we should sit down together. Just the two of us, no lawyers. Talk through this like adults. Everything I have to say goes through Aisha. Come on, don't be like that. We're still married. We can still talk to each other." "Derek, you hired private investigators to dig into my mental health history. You tried to hack my business servers. You've been hiding assets for months while pretending to be a loving husband. What exactly do you think we have to talk about?" Another long pause. When Derek spoke again, his voice had lost its conciliatory tone. "You have no idea what you're doing, Noel. You think this is some kind of game, but you're playing with forces you don't understand. I built everything we have, everything. And you're trying to destroy it because you're angry about some banking transactions." There was the real Derek, the man who believed he owned everything, including me. The man who thought my intelligence was decorative and my agency was optional. "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Derek. I'm trying to claim what's mine." "Yours?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You gave up your career to support mine. You chose to be a wife instead of a professional. You don't get to rewrite history now because you're having second thoughts." "I didn't give up my career, Derek. You slowly squeezed me out of it. There's a difference." "Jesus, Noel, you sound paranoid. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these feelings." The suggestion that I needed psychiatric help was delivered so smoothly, so casually, that it took me a moment to recognize it as another manipulation attempt. Derek was trying to plant doubt about my mental stability, even in a private conversation between us. "This conversation is over, Noel." Wait, I hung up and immediately called the recording to my evidence folder. 27 minutes of Derek revealing exactly how he saw our marriage, our divorce, and my right to financial independence. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with one final message from Derek. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't throw away 15 years over money." 15 years. He couldn't even get the length of our marriage right. I screenshot the message and filed it with the others. Evidence of a man who had stopped paying attention to our shared life so long ago that he couldn't remember when it began. The morning of our mandatory court appearance, I woke at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm. My body had absorbed the significance of this day, the weight of months of preparation crystallizing into a single hearing that would determine whether Derek would finally face consequences for his games. I dressed with the same methodical precision I'd once applied to user research presentations. Navy suit that commanded respect without demanding attention, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that said professional rather than emotional divorcee. Every detail calculated to project competence and credibility. Maya had prepared 3 binders of documentation, financial records, communication logs, missed deadline notifications, and Derek's pattern of non-compliance with court orders. The evidence was organized with the precision of a legal brief and the clarity of a user experience flowchart. Ready? Aisha asked as we walked through the courthouse metal detectors at 8:15 a.m. I've been ready for 3 years. Family Court Department 12 was smaller than I'd expected, more like a conference room than the dramatic courtroom settings I'd seen in movies. Judge Helena Torres sat behind a modest bench, reviewing case files with the focused attention of someone who'd spent decades cutting through divorce theater to find actual facts. She was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe 55, with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Her reputation for no-nonsense proceedings was evident in the way she organized her desk, everything in its place, no tolerance for clutter or confusion. At 9 o'clock am sharp, Judge Torres called our case. Grant versus Grant. Counsel, please state your appearances. Aisha Marquez for petitioner Noel Grant. Your Honor. We waited. The courtroom stayed silent except for the quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic beyond the windows. Caleb Sorensen for respondent Derek Grant. Your Honor. Caleb's voice carried from the back of the courtroom as he hurried through the doors, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other. Mr. Sorensen, Judge Torres said without looking up from her notes. You're 3 minutes late. My apologies, Your Honor. Traffic was. Where's your client? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Caleb glanced around the courtroom as if Derek might materialize from behind a pillar or emerge from the gallery seating. Your Honor, Mr. Grant is. He's experiencing a family emergency. His elderly mother in Portland had a medical incident and he had to fly out unexpectedly last night. Judge Torres finally looked up from her paperwork, her expression cooling several degrees. Mr. Sorensen, this hearing was scheduled 6 weeks ago. Your client has been personally served with the order requiring his appearance. Are you telling me he prioritized a family visit over a mandatory court appearance? It's a medical emergency, Your Honor. Life-threatening. We can provide hospital documentation. Did your client request a continuance? The situation developed very suddenly, Mr. Sorensen. Yes or no? Did your client file a motion for continuance prior to this hearing? No, Your Honor. Did he contact the court to request an emergency postponement? No, Your Honor. But did he personally appear today as ordered by this court? Caleb's pause stretched long enough that I could hear someone's stomach growling 3 rows behind us. No, Your Honor. Judge Torres made a note on her legal pad, her pen moving with sharp, decisive strokes. Miss Marquez, how would you like to proceed? Aisha stood with the fluid confidence of someone who'd been preparing for exactly this moment. Your Honor, respondent has shown a pattern of non-compliance with court orders. He has failed to provide complete financial disclosure despite multiple deadlines. He has missed 2 scheduled mediation sessions, and now he has failed to appear at a mandatory hearing. After being personally served with notice, she opened the first binder Maya had prepared. The petitioner respectfully requests that the court find respondent in contempt and issue a bench warrant for his arrest. The words landed in the courtroom like stones dropped into still water. Bench warrant, arrest. The nuclear option I'd been building toward for months, Mr. Sorensen, Judge Torres said, her tone suggesting this was his last opportunity to salvage the situation. What evidence can you provide regarding your client's alleged family emergency? Caleb fumbled with his phone, clearly stalling for time. Your Honor, as I mentioned, we can provide hospital records, flight confirmations, medical documentation. Do you have any of that documentation with you today? Not with me, no, but we can submit it within 24 hours, Mr. Sorensen. Your client was required to appear in this courtroom today, not to provide excuses tomorrow, not to submit documentation next week. Today, he has failed to comply with a direct court order. I watched Caleb's careful composure begin to crack. Derek had clearly told him some version of the medical emergency story, probably at the last minute, leaving his lawyer to improvise a defense without supporting evidence. Your Honor, if we could just have a brief recess to contact Mr. Grant and confirm his status. No, Judge Torres's voice cut through Caleb's pleading like a surgical instrument. Mr. Grant has had 6 weeks to arrange his affairs around this hearing. He chose not to appear. The court will not reward his contempt with additional delays. She turned to Aisha. Miss Marquez, please approach with your contempt motion. Maya had drafted the motion weeks ago, anticipating this exact scenario. Aisha handed the document to Judge Torres, who reviewed it with the same methodical attention she'd given our case file. The motion cites a pattern of willful non-compliance, Judge Torres noted. Failure to provide complete financial disclosure, missed mediation deadlines, and now failure to appear at a mandatory hearing. Mr. Sorensen, how does your client respond to these allegations? Your Honor, Mr. Grant has been cooperating in good faith throughout these proceedings. The financial disclosure issues are complex, Mr. Sorensen. Your client provided a 47-page document that disclosed 3 bank accounts and claimed total assets of $127,000. The petitioner has evidence of at least 7 additional corporate entities and offshore accounts containing substantially more funds. Would you characterize that as good faith disclosure? Caleb's expression suggested he was learning about Derek's financial shell game in real time. Your Honor, if there are additional accounts, we can certainly provide one. When will you provide complete disclosure? You've requested 3 extensions already. We would ask for one final extension. No, Judge Torres's decision was immediate and final. The court finds that respondent Derek Grant is in willful contempt of court orders requiring his appearance and complete financial disclosure. A bench warrant will be issued immediately. She looked at her court clerk. Please prepare the warrant. The clerk began typing on her computer, the quiet clicking of keys marking the moment Derek's legal games transformed into criminal consequences. Your Honor, Caleb tried one more time. Perhaps we could discuss alternative sanctions, Mr. Sorensen. Your client has treated this court's orders as suggestions rather than legal requirements. He has failed to appear at a mandatory hearing after being personally served with notice. The appropriate remedy is arrest and detention until he can be brought before this court. Judge Torres signed the warrant with the same decisive pen strokes she'd used to take notes. Bailiff, please coordinate with the San Francisco Sheriff's Department for service of this warrant. I felt something inside me shift, not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. For the first time since filing for divorce, the legal system was holding Derek accountable for his behavior. No charm, no manipulation, no corporate lawyer smooth talking could change the fact that he defied a direct court order. Miss Marquez, Judge Torres continued, given respondent's pattern of non-compliance and flight risk, the court is prepared to grant an ex parte order freezing all known assets pending his appearance and complete disclosure. Thank you, Your Honor. We've prepared the asset freeze motion as well. Maya had anticipated this too, drafting emergency motions for every possible outcome. As Aisha handed over the asset freeze paperwork, I realized we'd just accomplished in one hearing what Derek's delay tactics had been designed to prevent for months. Mr. Sorensen, your client has 48 hours to surrender himself to the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. After that, he will be actively pursued by law enforcement. Caleb nodded numbly, clearly calculating how quickly he could distance himself from Derek's sinking ship. Understood, Your Honor. This hearing is adjourned. The court expects full compliance with all outstanding orders upon respondent's arrest and appearance. Judge Torres gathered her papers and left the bench with the same efficient precision she'd brought to the entire proceeding. The whole thing had taken less than 20 minutes. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Caleb approached us with the desperate energy of a man trying to salvage his professional reputation. Aisha, perhaps we could discuss a resolution that avoids the arrest warrant. I'm sure Derek can explain the situation once he returns from Portland. Caleb, your client isn't in Portland. Aisha's voice was patient but firm. We both know he's not visiting his sick mother. He chose not to appear because he thought he could manipulate the system one more time. You don't know that his mother died 4 years ago, I said quietly. The lie was so casual, so easily verifiable, that even Caleb looked shocked. Derek had built his excuse on a foundation that wouldn't survive 5 minutes of basic fact-checking. Caleb's professional composure finally cracked completely. I need to make some phone calls. As he walked away, fumbling with his phone, Aisha turned to me with something approaching admiration. How did you know about his mother? She died of cancer our 3rd year of marriage. Derek gave the eulogy. It was the last time I saw him cry. The memory felt distant now, like something that had happened to different people. He's used her death as an excuse for missed meetings at least 6 times since then. Maya joined us in the hallway, practically vibrating with excitement. The warrant is already in the system. Sheriff's department will have it within the hour. How long before they find him? I asked. Depends where he's hiding. If he's at home or his office, probably by end of business today. If he's somewhere else, I shrugged. The SFED is very efficient with bench warrants, especially for high-profile arrests. High profile. The reality was settling in Derek's arrest would be public record, searchable by journalists and competitors and anyone else who wanted to know why the CEO of Nexus Analytics was being detained by the San Francisco Sheriff's Department. My phone buzzed with a text from Isaac. Saw the court calendar online. How did it go? I typed back. Bench warrant issued. Asset freeze granted. Derek has 48 hours to surrender. Isaac's response was immediate. Holy shit, you actually did it. Yes, I thought as we walked through the courthouse lobby and back into the bright San Francisco morning. I actually did it. For the first time in years, I felt the satisfaction of a complex system working exactly as designed. Derek had spent months trying to hack the legal process, attempting to exploit loopholes and manipulate outcomes through charm and delay tactics. But justice, it turned out, had better debugging protocols than Derek had anticipated. My phone rang as we reached the parking garage. Unknown number. Mrs. Grant? This is Kara Lynn from TechCrunch. I understand there was a significant development in your divorce case this morning. Would you be available for a brief comment? The story was already beginning to leak. Derek's carefully maintained public image was about to collide with the reality of criminal arrest warrants and asset freezes. Miss Lynn, I'll need to refer you to my attorney, of course. But Mrs. Grant, off the record, how does it feel to finally hold your husband accountable? I looked up at the city skyline where Derek's company logo still glowed on the side of a downtown high-rise, a monument to the success he'd built while slowly erasing me from our shared life. It feels like the system is finally working the way it was designed to work. Thank you, Mrs. Grant. I think my readers are going to find your story very compelling. As we drove back to Aisha's office to coordinate the asset freeze implementation, I realized the next phase was beginning. Derek's arrest would be just the start of a very public reckoning, not just with our marriage, but with the entire culture of Silicon Valley manipulation that had enabled men like him to treat relationships like user interfaces to be optimized for their own benefit. Derek had spent years debugging his way around consequences. But some systems, once triggered, couldn't be hacked. The warrant was issued. The trap was sprung. Now we waited for Derek to learn that the woman he'd underestimated for 8 years had finally written better code than he had. Derek was arrested at 2:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon in the lobby of Nexus Analytics, surrounded by his employees, 3 potential investors, and a journalist who happened to be in the building for an unrelated interview. I know the exact time because Maya called me the moment the arrest appeared in the San Francisco Sheriff's Department booking system, her voice tight with professional excitement and something that sounded suspiciously like vindication. He tried to run, she said without preamble. SFED went to his office first, but he wasn't there. They tracked his phone to a parking garage near SFO. Looks like he was planning to leave the country. I was in my home office, working on a user interface redesign for a medical device startup. When the call came, the irony wasn't lost on me. While Derek's world was collapsing in handcuffs and perp walks, I was quietly building interfaces that would actually help people solve real problems. What happens now? I asked. He'll be processed and held until his arraignment, probably tomorrow morning. Judge Torres set bail conditions that require him to surrender his passport and remain in San Francisco County. After Maya hung up, I sat in the silence of my house now, according to the asset freeze order, and felt an unexpected emptiness. Not sadness exactly, but the strange hollow sensation that comes after the resolution of a complex problem. All that analytical energy, all those months of strategic planning, suddenly had nowhere to go. My phone buzzed with a text from Isaac. Derek Grant booking photo just hit Twitter. You need to see this. I opened the link he sent. Derek's mugshot was everything. His carefully curated professional headshots were not disheveled hair, rumpled shirt, eyes wide with the shock of someone who'd finally encountered a system he couldn't manipulate. The caption read, Nexus Analytics CEO arrested on contempt charges in messy divorce proceedings. The comments were already pouring in. Karma for all those layoffs last year. Classic tech bro thinking rules don't apply to him. His wife must have some serious dirt on him. Nexus has been hemorrhaging talent for months. This explains why within an hour, the story had spread across every major tech blog and social media platform. Derek's arrest wasn't just personal embarrassment, it was professional annihilation in real time. Carolyn's article appeared on TechCrunch at 4:23 p.m., and it was more thorough than I'd expected. She'd clearly been researching Derek's company for weeks, building a profile of financial mismanagement and employee dissatisfaction that made his arrest seem like the inevitable conclusion of a pattern of misconduct. The woman he tried to erase ran with Derek's booking photo next to a professional headshot of me from my Palantir days back when I still believed my intelligence was an asset rather than a threat to my marriage. Kara had somehow obtained details about Derek's shell companies, his attempts to hide assets, and his pattern of emotional manipulation that she presented not as marital dysfunction but as a case study in Silicon Valley's broader problem with powerful men who believed accountability was optional. The article quoted anonymous sources at Nexus Analytics describing Derek's increasingly erratic behavior, missed investor meetings, and desperate attempts to secure funding while his wife quietly built a successful consulting practice he'd spent years dismissing as playing business. But the most devastating paragraph came near the end. According to court documents, Grant's wife Noelle had been documenting his financial misconduct and emotional manipulation for over 3 years, building a case with the methodical precision of the UX researcher she was before giving up her career to support his startup dreams. While Grant was busy creating the public image of a successful entrepreneur, his wife was creating something more valuable, an unbreakable record of the truth. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Reporters, former colleagues, clients, wanting to know if the publicity would affect their projects. I let them all go to voicemail. The only call I answered was from Derek himself, calling from the county jail at 6:15 p.m. Noelle. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the confident charm that had carried him through years of boardroom presentations and investor pitches. Derek, I need you to call Caleb. Tell him to get me out of here. I'm not calling your lawyer, Derek, please. This is insane. I'm sitting in a cell with actual criminals over some paperwork technicalities. The inability to understand what he'd done even now, even arrested and humiliated, was so fundamentally Derek that I almost laughed. He still believed this was about paperwork rather than years of systematic deception. You defied a court order, Derek. You lied to a judge. You tried to flee the country rather than face the consequences of your behavior. I wasn't fleeing. I was going to Portland to handle some business. Your mother is dead, Derek. She died 4 years ago. You gave the eulogy. The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear other voices in the background. The ambient noise of the county jail where Derek was learning that charm and corporate titles meant nothing. I panicked, he said finally. Everything's falling apart and I panicked. What's falling apart? The company, the investors, everything. His voice cracked slightly. Nexus is done, Noelle. We're going to lose everything. There was the truth Derek had been hiding behind months of financial shell games and delay tactics. His startup wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing completely, taking his entire identity with it. I'm sorry that happened, I said, and meant it. Not sorry enough to forgive years of manipulation and emotional abuse, but sorry for the man who'd built his entire sense of self around a business that was now being discussed on social media as a cautionary tale. Can you ask Aisha to work something out? I'll give you whatever you want. The house, the cars, half of everything. Just make this stop. Derek, I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted you to stop trying to erase me. I never tried to erase you. Even now, even after everything, he couldn't acknowledge what he'd done. The years of dismissing my opinions, minimizing my intelligence, treating my career as a hobby he could switch on and off according to his convenience, none of it registered as erasure in his mind. I have to go, I said. Noelle, wait, please. I love you. I know I fucked up, but I love you and we can fix this. No, Derek, we can't. I hung up and immediately blocked his number. Whatever conversation we needed to have about asset division and divorce settlement could happen through our lawyers. The marriage was over, had been over for years. The arrest had just made it official. That evening, I met Isaac and Maya for dinner at a small restaurant in No Valley. far from the tech corridor where Derek's professional collapse was the subject of every conversation. I have to ask, Isaac said over appetizers. How does it feel? Watching Derek's world implode in real time? I considered the question while sipping wine that Derek hadn't chosen, in a restaurant he wouldn't have approved of, surrounded by people who knew me as Noelle rather than Derek's wife. Empty, I said finally. I thought I'd feel vindicated, or satisfied, or something, but mostly I just feel hollow. That's normal, Maya offered. You've been focused on this goal for so long that achieving it probably feels anticlimactic. It's more than that. Derek and I spent 8 years building a life together. Watching him destroy it all in a few hours is just sad. Isaac nodded. You're grieving the marriage you thought you had, not the one you actually had. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another article, this one from Forbes, examining the broader implications of Derek's arrest for startup culture and the treatment of spouses who sacrifice careers for their partner's entrepreneurial dreams. The headline read, "When the algorithm of abuse finally gets debugged." Jesus, Maya said, reading over my shoulder. They're making you a symbol. I'm not trying to be a symbol. I'm just trying to get divorced. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true anymore. Derek's arrest had transformed our private marital dysfunction into a public conversation about power dynamics in Silicon Valley relationships. Women were sharing their own stories in the comments sections, describing husbands who'd convinced them to give up careers for startups that failed, partners who'd hidden assets while claiming financial stress, men who'd treated their wives' intelligence as a threat to be managed rather than an asset to be valued. I had become, whether I wanted it or not, a case study in what happened when the underestimated wife finally stopped playing by her husband's rules. You know what the best part is? Isaac said, scrolling through the social media response to Derek's arrest. All these tech executives are reading about Derek and wondering if their own wives are documenting their behavior. Good, I said. Maybe some of them will start acting like their spouses are actual partners instead of decorative accessories. My phone rang again. This time it was Aisha. Noelle, I have news. Caleb Sorensen just filed a motion to withdraw as Derek's counsel. He's abandoning ship. Can he do that? With a client facing criminal charges and asset freezes, the court will probably grant it. Derek's going to need a criminal defense attorney now, not a divorce lawyer. What does that mean for our case? It means Derek's legal strategy just collapsed along with everything else. His new lawyer is going to advise him to settle quickly and quietly before this gets even worse. After dinner, I drove home through the city that had watched Derek's empire crumble in a single afternoon. San Francisco at night looked the same as always, glittering bridges, fog rolling in from the Pacific, the endless cycle of boom and bust that defined the tech industry. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, I was driving to my own house, working on my own business, living my own life. Derek's story was becoming a cautionary tale, but mine was just beginning. I parked in the driveway of the Victorian house I'd found and Derek had dismissed as too expensive, until he realized it was a good investment. Tomorrow I would start the process of making it fully mine, redecorating the spaces he'd dominated, turning his office into something that reflected my taste rather than his need to project success. My phone had 17 missed calls, 43 unread emails, and a voicemail box full of interview requests. The story of Derek's arrest was evolving into something larger, a cultural moment that demanded response and analysis. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in my kitchen with a cup of tea and appreciate the silence. No Derek working late on mysterious deals. No strategic phone calls that excluded me from decisions about our shared life. No careful performance of the supportive wife role. Just me, in my house, planning my future without input from a man who'd spent years convincing me my opinion didn't matter. The local news came on at 11, leading with Derek's arrest and the broader implications for tech industry accountability. His booking photo flashed on screen again, followed by footage of Nexus Analytics employees leaving the building with boxes of personal belongings. I turned off the television and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring more reporters, more legal proceedings, more public dissection of the marriage I was finally ready to leave behind. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was sleeping alone by choice rather than circumstance. And that felt like the most important victory of all. The emergency settlement meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock a.m. Friday morning in the conference room of a downtown law firm that specialized in crisis management for wealthy men who'd found themselves in impossible legal positions. Derek's new attorney, Marcus Webb, had been retained at midnight by Derek's father, a man I'd met exactly twice in 8 years of marriage and who had apparently decided his son's public humiliation reflected poorly on the family name. I arrived 15 minutes early, with Aisha and Maya, carrying 3 binders of documentation and the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. The conference room overlooked the financial district, where Derek had once imagined himself building a tech empire that would cement his legacy as a Silicon Valley visionary. Marcus Webb was everything Caleb Sorensen wasn't: older, grayer, expensive, in a way that suggested retainer fees most people couldn't pronounce. He stood when we entered, extending a hand with the practiced warmth of someone who specialized in making disasters disappear. Miss Marquez, Mrs. Grant, thank you for agreeing to this emergency session. I understand the situation has become quite complex. Complex was a diplomatic way of describing Derek's arrest, the asset freeze, and the media circus that had transformed our divorce into a Silicon Valley cautionary tale. Where is your client, Mr. Webb? Aisha asked, settling into her chair. With the relaxed posture of someone who held the stronger legal position, Mr. Grant was released on his own reconnaissance at 6 this morning. He's currently meeting with crisis management specialists to address the public relations aspects of this situation. Of course he was. Even facing criminal contempt charges, Derek's first priority was managing his image rather than accepting responsibility for his behavior. Mr. Webb, I said quietly, I'm not interested in helping your client rehabilitate his public image. I'm interested in completing our divorce proceedings according to the court's orders. Marcus smiled with the practiced patience of someone who'd spent decades negotiating on behalf of men who believed rules were suggestions. Mrs. Grant, I completely understand your position. Mr. Grant has asked me to convey his sincere apologies for the difficulties of recent weeks. He's prepared to offer a very generous settlement that would resolve all outstanding issues immediately. He slid a folder across the conference table. Inside was a single page outlining Derek's proposed settlement. Terms: $500,000 cash payment, the house, and my personal vehicle. In exchange, I would waive all claims to Derek's business assets, agree to a confidentiality clause preventing me from discussing our marriage publicly, and sign a statement acknowledging that our divorce was the result of irreconcilable differences, rather than Derek's misconduct. I read the document twice, then looked up at Marcus with genuine curiosity. Mr. Webb, this settlement assumes I'm financially desperate and legally naive. Did your client actually tell you I was both? Marcus's smile flickered slightly. Mrs. Grant, this is a substantial offer that would allow both parties to move forward with dignity. My dignity was never in question, Mr. Webb. Your client's is. Aisha leaned forward, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who dealt with too many wealthy men trying to buy their way out of consequences. Mr. Webb, your client has hidden approximately $3.2 million in assets across multiple offshore accounts and shell companies. He's facing potential criminal charges for financial fraud and contempt of court. This settlement offer suggests he's still not comprehending the gravity of his situation. I think there may be some misunderstanding about the complexity of Mr. Grant's business arrangements. Maya opened her laptop and turned it toward Marcus. On the screen was a flowchart documenting Derek's financial shell game: every hidden account, every corporate entity, every attempt to move assets beyond the reach of California family court. There's no misunderstanding, Maya said quietly. We have documentation of every transaction, every corporate filing, every attempt to hide marital assets. Your client has been systematically defrauding his wife for over 18 months. Marcus studied the screen with the expression of a man realizing his client had lied to him about fundamental facts. I see. And this documentation is comprehensive and admissible, Aisha confirmed. Your client hired private investigators to discredit my client's mental health while she was building an airtight case against his financial misconduct. Poor strategic choice. I'd like to take a brief recess to consult with my client, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. Of course, I replied. Take all the time you need. Marcus stepped out into the hallway, leaving us alone in the conference. room overlooking the city where Derek's reputation was currently being dissected by every tech blog and social media platform. He's going to come back with a better offer, Aisha predicted, reviewing her notes from the brief meeting. It doesn't matter what he offers, I said. Derek hasn't learned anything from his arrest. He still thinks this is a negotiation rather than a reckoning. Maya was monitoring social media on her laptop, tracking the ongoing conversation about Derek's arrest and its broader implications. The story's getting bigger. Forbes just published a piece about Silicon Valley divorce settlements and how successful women are being undervalued by their tech executive husbands. My phone buzzed with a text from Isaac. Derek's company stock just dropped 40%. Investors are bailing. The cascade effect was accelerating. Derek's arrest hadn't just destroyed his personal reputation, it was revealing the financial instability he'd been hiding from investors, employees, and creditors. Nexus Analytics was collapsing in real time, taking Derek's ability to negotiate from a position of strength with it. Marcus returned 20 minutes later, his expression considerably more serious than when he'd left. Mrs. Grant, my client would like to revise his settlement offer. He's prepared to acknowledge a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including business holdings, with no confidentiality requirements. All marital assets? Aisha asked. Including the offshore accounts and shell companies. Yes, though we would need to establish a timeline for asset recovery given the complexity of international banking regulations. It was a substantially better offer, but still built on the assumption that Derek could control the terms of his surrender. He was willing to split assets equally, but only if he could manage the timing and presentation of that division. Mr. Webb, I said, I appreciate your client's willingness to negotiate more fairly, but this settlement still doesn't address the fundamental issue, which is, your client spent months defying court orders, hiding assets, and attempting to manipulate legal proceedings. The court has found him in contempt and issued a bench warrant. I'm not interested in helping him avoid the consequences of that behavior. Marcus looked genuinely confused. Mrs. Grant, a favorable settlement would resolve all outstanding legal issues. Your client would receive substantial assets and could move forward with her life. I don't want to move forward, Mr. Webb. I want the court to complete its work. The silence that followed was thick with Marcus's dawning realization that I wasn't negotiating for financial advantage, I was insisting on systemic accountability. Mrs. Grant, if this case proceeds to trial, it will be very public, very expensive, very time-consuming. All of your private affairs will become matters of public record. My private affairs are already public record, Mr. Webb. Your client made sure of that when he chose to defy court orders rather than comply with basic disclosure requirements. Aisha opened the second binder Maya had prepared. Mr. Webb, we're prepared to proceed to trial with full financial discovery, depositions of your client's business associates, and expert testimony regarding patterns of financial abuse and high asset marriages. Your client's arrest yesterday was just the beginning of a very thorough legal process. Marcus was clearly recalculating, realizing that Derek's new legal team had inherited a case that was already lost. Perhaps we could discuss a settlement that includes acknowledgement of wrongdoing. No acknowledgement, I interrupted. Admission. I'm sorry? Your client doesn't need to acknowledge wrongdoing, Mr. Webb. He needs to admit it, specifically, in open court as part of his response to the contempt citation. The request was unprecedented in Marcus's experience. Wealthy men don't typically admit misconduct in family court proceedings. They negotiate settlements that allow them to maintain plausible deniability while buying their way out of consequences. But Derek had pushed this case beyond the realm of typical high-asset divorce negotiations. His pattern of defiance had made accountability unavoidable. Mrs. Grant, no attorney would advise a client to admit misconduct in open court when a private settlement is available. Then perhaps your client should have considered that before attempting to defraud family court proceedings. My phone rang. Derek's new number, probably a burner phone his crisis management team had acquired to avoid media attention. Excuse me, I said, stepping out of the conference room to take the call. Noel, thank God. Marcus is being way too conservative. We need to talk directly. Derek's voice carried the desperate energy of someone who'd spent the night in county jail, learning that money and connections couldn't insulate him from every consequence. We're talking through our attorneys, Derek. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Face to face. I need to explain what's really happening here. I know what's happening, Derek. You're trying to negotiate your way out of accountability. That's not Jesus, Noel. Everything's falling apart. The company, the investors, my reputation. I just need you to help me stop the bleeding. The request was so fundamentally Derek. Even after arrest and public humiliation, he still believed I existed to manage the damage from his poor decisions. Derek, I tried to help you for 8 years. I gave up my career to support yours. I minimized myself to make you feel successful. I ignored obvious signs of infidelity and financial misconduct because I wanted our marriage to work, and I'm grateful for that. I'm not finished. My voice carried a steel I'd never used with Derek before. The authority of someone who'd finally stopped caring about his comfort. You repaid that support by treating me like a decorative accessory. You dismiss my intelligence, minimize my contributions, and gradually erase my presence in my own life. And when I finally found the strength to leave, you tried to destroy my credibility and steal our shared assets. Noel, now you want me to help you manage the consequences of your own choices, to minimize the damage you've done to yourself through years of systematic deception and manipulation. I never meant to hurt you, Derek. Intent doesn't matter anymore. Impact does. And the impact of your behavior was the slow, methodical destruction of my sense of self-worth. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear traffic noise in the background. Derek was probably calling from his car, hiding from the reporters who'd been camped outside Nexus Analytics since his arrest. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Nothing, Derek. That's what you've never understood. I don't want anything from you except to be left alone to rebuild the life you tried to erase. But the settlement will be determined by the court according to California family law. You'll get half of what we built together, after complete asset disclosure and division. But you won't get to control the narrative or avoid accountability for your misconduct. This is going to destroy me. Derek, you destroyed yourself. I'm just refusing to help you hide the damage anymore. I hung up and returned to the conference room, where Marcus was reviewing the financial documentation Maya had compiled with the expression of someone calculating billable hours on a very expensive lost cause. Mr. Webb, I said, settling back into my chair, your client just called to ask me to help him stop the bleeding from his arrest and the collapse of his company. I declined. Marcus closed his laptop with the definitive gesture of someone abandoning a negotiation strategy. Mrs. Grant, I think it's clear that my client needs to reassess his position given the current circumstances. I think that's wise. We'll be in touch with Miss Marquez about scheduling a more realistic settlement discussion once Mr. Grant has processed recent developments. After Marcus left, Aisha, Maya, and I sat in the empty conference room watching San Francisco wake up below us. The morning commute was beginning. Tech workers streaming into the Soma offices where Derek had once imagined himself building an empire. How do you feel? Maya asked. I considered the question while watching the city Derek had tried to conquer slowly coming alive with the energy of people who understood that success required more than just clever manipulation of systems and people. Free, I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. Free enough to rebuild everything he tried to destroy. Free enough to build something entirely new. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in February with the kind of media attention usually reserved for celebrity scandals or political corruption cases. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, camera crews claimed strategic positions, and tech industry observers filled the gallery to witness what had become more than a divorce proceeding, a public reckoning with Silicon Valley's culture of unchecked masculine entitlement. I walked through the gauntlet of photographers wearing the same navy suit I'd chosen for our first contempt hearing, projecting the same quiet confidence that had carried me through months of Derek's manipulation attempts. But everything else had changed. The frightened woman who'd discovered emptied bank accounts 6 months ago had been replaced by someone who understood her own power. Judge Torres entered Family Court Department 12 at exactly 9 o'clock a.m., her expression making it clear that she would tolerate no theatrics from either side. The media attention hadn't influenced her approach. If anything, it had sharpened her focus on ensuring the proceedings remained about facts rather than spectacle. Counsel, we're here for final hearing in Grant versus Grant. Are both parties present? Derek sat at the defendant's table wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the damage of the past month. His arrest had aged him in ways that went beyond the obvious stress. His usual commanding presence had been replaced by the hunched posture of someone who'd learned that charm couldn't overcome documented evidence. Marcus Webb had been replaced by Derek's third attorney in 6 weeks, a criminal defense specialist named Patricia Vance who specialized in white-collar cases. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the sharp focus of someone who understood that her client's best strategy was damage control rather than victory. Miss Marquez, please present your opening statement. I stood with the measured confidence of someone who'd spent months building an unassailable case. Your Honor, the evidence will show that respondent Derek Grant engaged in a systematic pattern of financial fraud and emotional manipulation designed to control and diminish his wife while enriching himself at her expense. She opened the first exhibit binder, revealing the organizational system Maya had perfected over months of preparation. The petitioner will demonstrate that Mr. Grant hid approximately $3.2 million in marital assets across multiple offshore accounts and shell companies, lied to this court about his financial position, and defied direct court orders requiring disclosure and appearance. Derek's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes that meant he was calculating damage in real time. He'd spent his career quantifying problems and engineering solutions, but this was a system he couldn't hack. Furthermore, Aisha continued, the evidence will show that Mr. Grant's misconduct extended beyond financial fraud to include deliberate attempts to destroy his wife's professional credibility and emotional well-being through gaslighting, character assassination, and systematic erasure of her contributions to their shared success. Patricia Vance's opening was brief and strategic. Your Honor, Mr. Grant acknowledges that mistakes were made in the disclosure process. However, the characterization of these errors as deliberate fraud misrepresents the complex realities of modern tech entrepreneurship and the pressures my client faced as his company struggled with market challenges. It was a competent defense acknowledged the technical violations while reframing them as business stress rather than marital misconduct. But it required Derek to maintain the fiction that his behavior was reactive rather than calculating, accidental rather than systematic. Maya took the witness stand first, walking the court through the financial documentation with the precision of a forensic accountant explaining money laundering to a jury. Her testimony was devastating, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so thoroughly, methodically complete. Mrs. Patel, Aisha said, please describe for the court what you discovered when you traced the funds transferred from the Grant joint checking account on the morning of September 15. The $12,000 was moved to an account controlled by Cayman Holdings LLC, a company formed by Mr. Grant 3 weeks earlier. That account then transferred the funds to a cryptocurrency exchange which converted them to digital assets that were subsequently moved to an offshore wallet. And this pattern was repeated 47 times over an 18-month period, totaling $847,000 in marital assets that Mr. Grant moved beyond the reach of family court jurisdiction. Derek's attorney objected to the characterization of business transactions as asset hiding, but Judge Torres overruled with the impatience of someone who understood financial shell games better than most corporate lawyers. Miss Vance, your client signed documents under penalty of perjury claiming total assets of $127,000. The evidence shows he controlled over 40 times that amount. The court is not interested in semantic debates about business complexity. Isaac testified next, describing Derek's attempts to hack into my consulting business and his hiring of private investigators to discredit my mental health. His technical testimony was beyond most people's understanding, but Judge Torres followed every detail with the attention of someone who dealt with enough high-tech divorce cases to recognize digital stalking when she saw it. Mr. Lee, Aisha asked, in your professional opinion, were Mr. Grant's attempts to access Mrs. Grant's business servers consistent with legitimate business inquiry? No, the attack patterns were designed to access client contracts and financial projections while remaining undetected. This was corporate espionage, not research. Derek's cross-examination of Isaac was brief and ineffective. Patricia Vance clearly understood that challenging Isaac's technical expertise would only highlight the sophistication of Derek's misconduct. When I took the witness stand, the courtroom felt different, more focused, more charged with the weight of months of public anticipation. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the supposedly erased wife telling her story in her own words. Mrs. Grant, I shall begin. Please describe for the court your professional background before your marriage. I outlined my education at Berkeley, my work at Palantir, my specialization in user experience research and behavioral psychology. The credentials Derek had spent years minimizing suddenly carried weight in a forum where professional accomplishment was measured by documented achievement rather than social performance. And how did your career change after your marriage? Initially, I continued working while supporting Derek's startup, but gradually, he began suggesting that my career was competing with his need for domestic support. He framed it as temporary just until Nexus Analytics was established. That temporary pause lasted 8 years. During those 8 years, did you contribute to your husband's business? Extensively. I provided user research, interface design, consultation, and strategic planning. I also managed our household finances, social obligations, and investor relations. Derek's success was built on my unpaid labor, but he never acknowledged those contributions publicly. The testimony continued for 2 hours, covering the gradual erosion of my professional identity, Derek's increasing financial secrecy, and the pattern of emotional manipulation that had convinced me to doubt my own perceptions. Patricia Vance's cross-examination was more aggressive than I'd expected, attempting to paint me as an embittered spouse, exaggerating normal marital tensions. Mrs. Grant, isn't it true that you chose to prioritize your marriage over your career? I chose to support my husband's career with the understanding that it was a temporary sacrifice for our mutual benefit. I didn't choose to be erased from financial decisions or dismissed as intellectually irrelevant, but you receive substantial benefits from your husband's success: a beautiful home, financial security, social status. Miss Vance, I received those things in exchange for giving up my professional identity and accepting a subordinate role in my own marriage. That's not generosity, it's a transaction that favored Derek disproportionately. Mrs. Grant, millions of spouses support their partners' careers without considering themselves victims of abuse, and millions of spouses are acknowledged as partners rather than treated as decorative accessories. Derek never saw me as a collaborator, he saw me as a resource to be managed. Judge Torres intervened before Patricia could continue that line of questioning. Miss Vance, the court has extensive documentation of financial misconduct. Character debates about spousal roles don't address the legal issues before this court. Derek's testimony was the moment his defense strategy completely collapsed. Patricia had clearly coached him to appear contrite and overwhelmed rather than calculating and manipulative, but Derek couldn't maintain the performance under Aisha's methodical cross-examination. Mr. Grant, Aisha said, you testified that you formed Cayman Holdings LLC for legitimate business purposes. What were those purposes? It was part of our international expansion strategy. What international expansion? According to your company's SEC filings, Nexus Analytics had no international operations or plans. Derek paused too long, clearly searching for an explanation that wouldn't contradict his sworn testimony. We were exploring opportunities by moving $847,000 in marital assets to an offshore account your wife knew nothing about. That money was earmarked for business development. Mr. Grant, the cryptocurrency transactions from that account were used to purchase luxury items, including a $47,000 watch and a $23,000 vacation to Cabo San Lucas. How do those purchases relate to business development? Derek's face flushed as he realized his testimony was contradicted by documented evidence he'd forgotten Aisha possessed. Those were research expenses. Understanding the luxury market for our potential customer base, the excuse was so transparent that I saw Judge Torres suppress what might have been a smile. Derek was lying under oath about easily verifiable facts, destroying his credibility in real time. Mr. Grant, did you inform your wife about this research vacation to Cabo? The specifics of business travel aren't usually shared in detail. Mr. Grant, you traveled to Cabo with Miss Amanda Reeves, your former marketing director. Was she conducting luxury market research as well? The courtroom went completely silent. Derek's affair, which he'd managed to keep out of the public record despite months of investigation, had just been revealed in open court through his own perjured testimony. That's not. Miss Reeves was a business associate. Mr. Grant, the hotel records show you shared a $1,200 per night suite with Miss Reeves for 4 days. The expenses were charged to the Cayman Holdings account using funds you transferred from your joint marital checking account. Are you testifying that this was a business expense? Derek looked at Patricia, who was clearly calculating whether her client could survive this line of questioning or if she should advise him to take the Fifth Amendment. Mr. Grant, Judge Torres interjected, you're under oath. Please answer the question. I refuse to answer on the grounds that it might incriminate me. The admission of guilt was complete. Derek had just acknowledged in open court that his financial misconduct was criminal rather than civil, that his hidden assets were deliberately fraudulent rather than accidentally concealed. Judge Torres made a note on her legal pad with the same decisive pen strokes I'd seen her use to sign Derek's arrest warrant. Mr. Grant, this court will note your invocation of Fifth Amendment protections regarding the use of marital assets for personal expenses with non-spousal companions. The trial continued for 2 more days, but Derek's credibility was beyond repair. Expert witnesses testified about patterns of financial abuse in high-asset marriages. Forensic accountants traced the complete maze of Derek's hidden assets. And character witnesses described the gradual transformation of our marriage from partnership to performance. Carolyn sat in the gallery throughout the proceedings, taking notes for what would become a 3-part series about divorce proceedings. As a window into Silicon Valley's broader cultural problems, the story was no longer just about Derek and me, it had become a case study in institutional accountability. On Thursday afternoon, Judge Torres called for closing arguments. Your Honor, Aisha said, the evidence shows systematic financial fraud, deliberate contempt of court orders, and a pattern of emotional manipulation designed to maintain Mr. Grant's control over marital assets and his wife's agency. The petitioner requests full equitable division of disclosed assets, attorney fees, and sanctions for Mr. Grant's misconduct. Patricia's closing was brief and focused on mitigation rather than defense. Your Honor, Mr. Grant acknowledges errors in judgment and disclosure. He requests the court's consideration of his cooperation in recent weeks and his willingness to comply with all outstanding orders. Judge Torres reviewed her notes for several minutes before delivering her ruling. Mr. Grant's testimony demonstrates a fundamental disrespect for this court's authority and the basic requirements of marital partnership. His pattern of financial concealment, combined with his documented attempts to undermine his wife's credibility, represents misconduct that goes beyond typical marital discord. She looked directly at Derek, who was staring at the table in front of him. Mr. Grant, you will surrender all hidden assets for immediate division. You will pay all attorney fees and court costs, and you will comply with a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Mrs. Grant except through counsel. The gavel fell with the finality of a system that had finally worked exactly as designed. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me with questions about victory and vindication and justice served. But I found myself thinking about the woman who'd discovered those emptied bank accounts 9 months ago, how small she'd felt, how convinced she'd been that Derek's version of reality was the only one that mattered. Mrs. Grant, Carolyn asked, what do you want other women to learn from your experience? I looked back at the courthouse where Derek was probably meeting with Patricia about appeal options and damage control, that the person trying to convince you that you're crazy is probably the one who can't afford for you to trust your own judgment. The truth, it turned out, had been worth fighting for. The final judgment arrived on a Thursday morning in March, delivered not with dramatic flourish but as a 73-page document in my email inbox at 6:47 a.m. Judge Torres had taken 3 weeks to craft her ruling, and the thoroughness showed every aspect of Derek's misconduct documented, every hidden asset accounted for, every manipulation attempt cataloged with the precision of a forensic audit. I read the judgment while drinking coffee in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd discovered Derek's first financial betrayal 9 months earlier. But everything else had changed. The house was legally mine now, along with half of Derek's disclosed assets, full ownership of Winters Consulting, and a restraining order that would keep Derek's influence permanently out of my life. The financial settlement was substantial: $1.6 million in cash and investments, plus the Victorian house I'd found and Derek had reluctantly purchased. But the real victory was buried in Judge Torres's written analysis. 3 pages of legal language that essentially concluded Derek had systematically abused the family court system while emotionally manipulating his wife. Respondent's pattern of financial concealment, combined with documented attempts to undermine petitioner's mental health and professional credibility, represents conduct that goes beyond typical marital discord into the realm of systematic psychological abuse, Judge Torres had written. The court finds that respondent deliberately and repeatedly violated his fiduciary duties as a spouse while using emotional manipulation to maintain control over marital assets and decisions. My phone rang as I finished reading. Aisha, calling from her car. Have you seen it? She asked without preamble. Just finished reading. It's more comprehensive than I expected. Torres didn't just rule in your favor, she eviscerated Derek's entire defense strategy. This judgment is going to be cited in family law cases for years. The legal precedent was already becoming clear. Derek's case had become a template for recognizing financial abuse in high-asset marriages, a roadmap for other courts dealing with wealthy spouses who believe superior resources could overcome documented misconduct. There's something else, Aisha continued. Patricia Vance filed a notice this morning. Derek's not appealing. The news was surprising. Derek's ego and financial resources suggested he would fight the judgment through every available appellate court rather than accept a ruling that painted him as an abusive husband and fraudulent businessman. His new lawyer probably explained that an appeal would require posting a bond for the full settlement amount while generating even more negative publicity, Aisha explained. Derek's finally learning that some systems can't be gamed. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen watching San Francisco wake up beyond my windows. The city looked different now, not the backdrop for Derek's failed empire, but the foundation for whatever I chose to build next. My laptop chimed with an email notification. Cara Lynn, asking for comment on the final judgment for her follow-up article. She'd been covering the case since Derek's arrest, turning our divorce into a broader examination of power dynamics in Silicon Valley marriages. I typed a brief response. I'm grateful that the legal system worked as designed. Truth and documentation ultimately matter more than charm and manipulation, but the real story was happening elsewhere. My phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from women who'd read Kara's coverage and recognized their own experiences in my descriptions of Derek's behavior. Wives of tech executives, partners of startup founders, women who'd been convinced to sacrifice their careers for men who'd gradually erased their contributions to shared success. I've been documenting my husband's financial secrecy for 2 years, but I thought I was being paranoid, one message read. Your case made me realize I wasn't crazy, I was being smart. Another, my ex-husband used to call my MBA cute and introduce me as the pretty one at his company events. I thought that was normal until I read about your experience. The messages kept coming throughout the morning, each one a variation on the same theme. Women who'd been gaslit into doubting their own perceptions, convinced that their intelligence was decorative rather than valuable, manipulated into accepting subordinate roles in relationships they'd entered as equals. Maya called around noon with updates on the asset recovery process. Derek's offshore accounts were being traced and frozen, his shell companies dissolved and their assets transferred to court-controlled accounts. The financial maze he'd spent months constructing was being systematically dismantled by forensic accountants working under federal supervision. He tried to move another $200,000 yesterday, Maya reported. International wire to a bank in the Caymans. The court order caught it before processing. Even after losing everything, Derek was still trying to manipulate the system, still believing he could engineer a solution that would let him escape consequences through superior strategy and hidden resources. What happens to that money? It gets added to the marital estate for division. Derek's attempt to hide it just increased your settlement by another $100,000. The irony was perfect. Derek's compulsive need to control and manipulate was actively making his situation worse, triggering additional penalties and sanctions with each new attempt to game the system. Isaac arrived at my house that afternoon carrying a bottle of champagne and a laptop bag full of technical equipment. Time to celebrate and upgrade, he announced, setting up what looked like a small server farm on my kitchen table. Your business is about to get a lot more attention, and we need to make sure your systems can handle it. He was right. Winters Consulting had been getting inquiries from potential clients who'd read about my case and wanted to work with someone who understood both technology and systematic manipulation. My background in user experience research, combined with my recent crash course in legal strategy, had created an unexpected professional niche. I've been thinking about expanding, I said, watching Isaac configure security protocols that would make my business systems more secure than most Fortune 500 companies. Maybe bringing on other consultants who understand both tech and recovery. From manipulative relationships. A consulting firm for survivors? A consulting firm run by people who understand that intelligence and trauma aren't mutually exclusive. That surviving systematic manipulation actually creates useful skills for analyzing complex problems. Isaac looked up from his laptop configuration. Noel, that's brilliant. You'd be creating something completely new. The idea had been percolating for weeks, inspired by the messages I'd been receiving from women whose experiences paralleled mine. There was a market and underserved population of highly educated, professionally accomplished people who'd been convinced they were crazy by partners who needed them to doubt their own judgment. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID showed it was from Derek's area code. Hello, Mrs. Grant? This is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm calling from the San Francisco County Sheriff's Department. We have your ex-husband in custody. My blood went cold. What happened? Mr. Grant was arrested this morning on federal charges related to financial fraud and money laundering. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been investigating his business practices for several months, and your divorce proceedings provided evidence they needed for criminal charges. The news was shocking but not entirely surprising. Derek's pattern of financial manipulation hadn't been limited to our marriage, it had infected his entire approach to business and legal compliance. Mrs. Grant, federal prosecutors would like to speak with you about serving as a witness in their case against your ex-husband. Your documentation of his financial misconduct could be crucial evidence. I thought about Derek sitting in a federal holding cell, finally facing consequences he couldn't manipulate or charm his way out of. The man who'd spent years convincing me I was too emotional to understand complex decisions was about to learn about decision-making in the federal prison system. Dr. Chen, I'll need to consult with my attorney before agreeing to any cooperation with federal prosecutors, of course. Here's my contact information when you're ready to discuss next steps. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen trying to process the escalation. Derek's arrest on contempt charges had been satisfying justice for his manipulation of our divorce proceedings. Federal criminal charges were something entirely different, a recognition that his misconduct had extended far beyond our marriage into systematic business fraud. Aisha called 15 minutes later, having already been contacted by federal prosecutors. Noel, Derek's been indicted on 12 counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The government wants your cooperation, but you're under no obligation to participate. What would cooperation involve? Testimony about his pattern of financial concealment, documentation of his hidden assets, expert analysis of his manipulation tactics. Essentially, you'd be explaining to a federal jury how Derek's abuse of you was part of a larger pattern of fraudulent behavior. The request felt like vindication and burden simultaneously. My careful documentation of Derek's misconduct had become evidence not just of marital abuse, but of criminal enterprise. The analytical skills I'd developed to survive his manipulation were now valuable enough that federal prosecutors wanted my expertise. I need to think about it, I said. Take your time. But Noel, this case could set important precedents for how the justice system handles financial abuse. Your story could help other people who are trapped in similar situations. That evening, I met with Isaac and Maya at a small restaurant in North Beach to discuss the day's developments and plan for whatever came next. The three of us had become an unlikely team: the UX researcher, the cybersecurity expert, and the paralegal who'd helped document one of the most comprehensive cases of marital financial abuse in California legal history. So what's next? Maya asked over appetizers. Federal testimony, business expansion, or just enjoying your freedom? I thought about the question while looking out at the San Francisco skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as fog rolled in from the Pacific. 9 months ago, I'd been a woman, discovering emptied bank accounts and feeling powerless to respond. Tonight, I was someone federal prosecutors wanted as an expert witness, someone building a business that could help other people escape systematic manipulation. All of it, I said finally. I want to testify against Derek if it helps establish legal precedents for other victims. I want to expand Winners Consulting into something that combines tech expertise with trauma recovery. And I want to enjoy the freedom to make choices based on my own judgment rather than someone else's convenience. Isaac raised his wine glass. To debugging the algorithm of abuse. To systems that finally work correctly, Maya added. To building something better than what we're leaving behind, I concluded. As we clinked glasses, I realized this wasn't an ending, it was the beginning of a life I'd been building in secret for years, finally ready to launch in full view of anyone who wanted to watch. Derek had taught me that intelligence could be weaponized against the person who possessed it. But I'd learned something more valuable. That same intelligence, properly directed and supported by law and evidence, could dismantle even the most sophisticated manipulation systems. The verdict was in. Justice had been served, but the real victory was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Winters Consulting's new office in downtown San Francisco, looking out at the bay where container ships moved with the patient precision of a global economy that had continued functioning while my personal world rebuilt itself from the ground up. The space was bright and modern, nothing like the corporate ostentation Derek had always preferred, but designed with the kind of thoughtful functionality that comes from understanding how people actually work rather than how they should look. While working, Maya entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder thick with client proposals. She'd joined Winters Consulting full-time after finishing her paralegal certification, bringing the same methodical precision to business development that had helped document Derek's financial fraud. The Henderson Group wants to schedule a follow-up meeting about the digital security audit, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. They're impressed by our approach to protecting executives from both external threats and internal misconduct. It was our specialty, now consulting for companies and individuals who needed protection from the kind of systematic manipulation Derek had perfected. Corporate executives worried about business partners hiding assets, high net worth individuals concerned about spouses with unexplained financial behavior, companies that wanted to audit their internal systems for potential fraud. My experience surviving Derek's manipulation had created an unexpected expertise. The ability to analyze complex human systems for signs of deliberate deception, to identify the patterns that separated honest mistakes from calculated misconduct. There's something else, Maya continued, opening her folder. Carolyn wants to interview you for her book. The publisher thinks your story could be the foundation for a larger examination of financial abuse in professional relationships. Kara's coverage of Derek's trial had evolved into a 3-part series, then a regular column about accountability in Silicon Valley, and now a book proposal that used our divorce as a case study in how intelligent people get trapped in manipulative relationships. The attention was gratifying, but also overwhelming. I'd become a public symbol for something I'd never intended to represent. What kind of interview? Comprehensive. Your background, the marriage, the divorce strategy, the business expansion. She wants to document the complete arc from victim to entrepreneur. I wasn't sure I liked being categorized as either victim or entrepreneur. The reality was more complex. I'd been a capable person in an impossible situation who'd found a way to document my experience systematically enough to prove what had happened when documentation mattered most. My laptop chimed with a video call notification. Isaac, calling from his office across the city where Fortress Digital had become the cybersecurity firm of choice for clients who'd learned about digital stalking and corporate espionage through Derek's case. How's the federal testimony prep going? He asked when I accepted the call. Thorough and exhausting. The prosecutors want me to walk the jury through 3 years of Derek's financial manipulation in enough detail that they understand the psychological impact without losing track of the criminal elements. Derek's federal trial was scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. The charges had expanded as investigators traced his financial misconduct beyond our marriage into tax evasion, investor fraud, and money laundering through Nexus Analytics. My testimony would focus on the systematic nature of his deception, how the skills he'd used to manipulate me were the same skills he'd used to defraud business partners and investors. Are you nervous about seeing him again? I considered the question while watching the late afternoon light shift across the bay. I hadn't seen Derek since the day Judge Torres issued her final ruling, when he'd left the courthouse surrounded by reporters and federal investigators. The restraining order had made it illegal for him to contact me directly, but I'd heard through legal channels that his life had continued its downward trajectory. Nexus Analytics had declared bankruptcy, his investors had filed civil suits, and his arrest photos had become a cautionary tale about startup culture excess. I'm not nervous about Derek, I said finally. I'm nervous about the spectacle, about having our entire marriage dissected in federal court for the education of a jury. You know you don't have to testify if you don't want to, I know. But the prosecutors are right, this case could establish important precedents for how the justice system handles financial abuse. If my experience helps other people prove what happened to them, it's worth the discomfort, Isaac nodded with the understanding of someone who'd watched me spend months building the evidence that had made Derek's conviction possible. You've come a long way from the woman who was afraid Derek might be right about her being too emotional to understand financial decisions. The observation was accurate but incomplete. I hadn't become a different person, I'd become myself without Derek's distorting influence. The analytical skills, the strategic thinking, the ability to see patterns in complex systems, all of that had always been there. Derek's manipulation had been designed to make me doubt my own capabilities, not to actually diminish them. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then looked up with an expression that suggested news. Worth interrupting our conversation. Derek's attorney just filed a plea agreement, she said, reading from her screen. He's accepting responsibility for all federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. The news was anticlimactic after months of preparation for trial. Derek was finally admitting guilt, but only after being cornered by evidence so comprehensive that denial was no longer strategically viable. What's the sentence recommendation? 18 months federal prison, full restitution to defrauded investors, and permanent prohibition from serving as an officer or director of any public company. It was a substantial penalty that would destroy Derek's ability to continue the patterns of manipulation that had defined his approach to business and relationships. But it also meant I wouldn't need to testify about our marriage in federal court, wouldn't need to explain to a jury how intelligent people can be systematically convinced to doubt their own judgment. How do you feel about it? Isaac asked. Relieved, mostly. Derek taking responsibility, even strategic responsibility, is more accountability than I expected him to ever accept. My phone rang with a call from Aisha, who'd been monitoring the federal case alongside Derek's ongoing civil litigation with former business partners and investors. Did you see the plea agreement? She asked. Maya just told me. Does this affect our divorce settlement? Not directly, but it might impact asset recovery. If Derek's required to pay full restitution to his investors, there might not be much left of his hidden assets after the federal penalties. The financial implications were significant but not devastating. The divorce settlement had already secured the house, my business assets, and enough liquid investments to provide long-term security. Derek's federal penalties would mostly affect money he'd hidden rather than assets we'd legitimately shared. There's something else, Aisha continued. Derek's attorney reached out about arranging a private meeting. Says Derek wants to apologize and discuss closure for both of you. The request was so fundamentally Derek, even facing federal prison. He was still trying to manage the narrative, to position himself as someone seeking redemption rather than someone finally accepting consequences. No, I said immediately. The restraining order exists for a reason. That's what I told them. But I wanted you to know he'd asked. After the calls ended, I sat in my office watching the city transition from day to evening. 6 months ago, Derek's request for a meeting would have created hours of internal debate analyzing his motivations, wondering if I owed him the courtesy of closure, questioning whether my refusal made me unreasonably vindictive. Now, the answer was simple and immediate. Derek had forfeited the right to my emotional labor when he chose manipulation over partnership. His need for closure was his problem to solve, not my responsibility to manage. Maya knocked on my office door, carrying a package that had been delivered by courier. This came for you, she said, setting it on my desk. No return address, but it passed security screening. Inside was a single document, the final divorce decree, officially signed and notarized, along with a brief note from the court clerk. Congratulations on your new beginning. The paperwork was unremarkable, just another legal document in a case that had generated hundreds of pages of court filings. But it represented something more significant, the official end of a marriage that had been effectively over for years. The legal recognition that Noel Grant and Derek Grant were no longer connected by anything except shared history. I filed the divorce decree in my personal documents folder, between my business and corporation papers and my new passport, the documents that define my identity as someone who existed independently of Derek's approval or manipulation. The evening staff was beginning to arrive for Winters Consulting's night shift, a team of analysts and investigators who worked with clients in different time zones, providing the kind of comprehensive background research and digital security assessment that had helped me survive Derek's campaign of professional sabotage. Business was expanding faster than I'd anticipated. Word was spreading through networks of corporate executives, high net worth individuals, and legal professionals about a consulting firm that understood both technical complexity and psychological manipulation. Clients came to us not just for cybersecurity and financial analysis, but for the kind of strategic thinking that comes from understanding how intelligent people can be systematically deceived. Noel, Maya called from the main conference room. The evening team wants to brief you on the Morrison case before they start tonight's research. The Morrison case was our most complex current project, a corporate executive whose business partner had been systematically moving company assets while gaslighting her about her concerns. The pattern was almost identical to Derek's approach, but in a business context rather than a marriage. I joined the team meeting, listening to updates on asset tracing, digital forensics, and psychological assessment that would help our client document what was happening before confronting her partner or involving law enforcement. The methodology we'd developed was part technical analysis, part legal strategy, and part therapeutic support, recognizing that people in manipulative situations needed both practical help and emotional validation. The preliminary evidence suggests a pattern of financial misconduct dating back 18 months, one of my analysts reported. But the client is still questioning whether she's overreacting to normal business stress. I recognized the self-doubt immediately, the same uncertainty I'd felt when Derek's explanations for missing money had seemed plausible despite contradicting obvious evidence. Schedule a client meeting for tomorrow morning, I said. I want to walk her through the documentation personally and help her understand that trusting her own judgment isn't overreacting, it's survival. After the team meeting, I returned to my office to finish reviewing client proposals and strategic planning documents. Winters Consulting was becoming the kind of business I'd always wanted to build: intellectually challenging work that actually helped people solve problems that mattered. My computer chimed with an email notification. A message from someone named Jennifer Chen. Subject line: "Thank you for showing me I wasn't crazy. Mrs. Grant," the email began. "I've been following your story since your husband's arrest. I wanted you to know that reading about your experience gave me the courage to document my own husband's financial abuse and file for divorce. Like you, I'm a professional woman who was convinced I was too emotional to understand money. Like you, I discovered I was actually too smart to keep ignoring obvious red flags. Your case helped me realize that intelligence and manipulation can coexist, that being deceived doesn't make someone stupid, just human." The message continued for several paragraphs, describing a marriage that paralleled mine in almost every detail except the tech industry setting. A successful woman, gradually convinced to doubt her own perceptions, a husband who'd hidden assets while claiming financial stress, a divorce process complicated by gaslighting and character assassination. I wanted you to know that your story is helping other people claim their own stories, Jennifer concluded. You've shown us that careful documentation can overcome even sophisticated manipulation, that the truth matters more than charm or social status. Thank you for refusing to be quiet about what happened to you. I forwarded the email to Maya and Isaac, adding a note: "This is why we're building what we're building." As the evening deepened and the city lights began to reflect off the bay, I realized I was exactly where I'd always been meant to be, not in spite of Derek's manipulation, but because surviving it had taught me skills I never would have developed otherwise. Derek had tried to erase me from my own life, to convince me that my intelligence was decorative and my judgment was unreliable. Instead, he'd forced me to become more analytical, more strategic, more methodical than I'd ever been before. His attempts to destroy my confidence had actually refined my capabilities into something much more powerful than he'd ever possessed. I gathered my things and prepared to leave the office, looking forward to driving home to a house that was entirely mine, decorated according to my taste, filled with the quiet satisfaction of choices made without consultation or compromise. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities to help people untangle themselves from systematic manipulation. But tonight, I just wanted to appreciate the simple pleasure of living a life that belonged completely to me. The algorithm of abuse had finally been debugged. The system was working perfectly. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.